All right, so I got an absolutely wild story here for you guys on the increasing ridiculous nature of our police state. So, apparently, according to the AP here, San Francisco just voted to allow their police force to use robots that can kill people and carry different assortments of weapons on them. Okay, so, obviously we live in the United States of America. Pretty much, regardless of what the topic is, our political system is always going to churn out the most dystopian possible choice that they can come up with. So, this is just another example of that. So, let's just go ahead and get into some of the details here, right? They say supervisors in San Francisco voted Tuesday to give city police the ability to use potentially lethal remote controlled robots in emergency situations following an emotionally charged debate that reflected divisions on the politically liberal board over support for law enforcement. Okay, keep in mind, we're talking about San Francisco and, their city councils, their boards. This goes for every single major city that is controlled by Democrats or liberals. They are always going to side overwhelmingly with the police. Okay, there are some issues in which they are more left wing on, particularly like social issues, but when it comes to the police, when it comes to supporting landlords, across the board, every major city is completely captured by those interests, right? So they continue here, saying that the vote was 8-3, with the majority agreeing to grant police the option despite strong objections from civil liberties and other police oversight groups. They say opponents said that the authority would lead to the further militarization of a police force already too aggressive with poor and minority communities. They say the San Francisco Police Department said that it does not have pre-armed robots and has no plans to arm robots with guns. We'll see how that plays out. They say, but the department could deploy robots equipped with explosive charges to, quote, contact, incapacitate, or disorient violent, armed, and or dangerous suspects when lives are at stake, an SFPD spokesperson said in a statement. Okay, so let's just read this one more time. Okay, so they say, oh, we don't have plans to do this right now. Obviously, to me, not really that strong of a statement condemning this or guaranteeing that you are not going to use these to actually arm them and use them against suspects. But they say the department could deploy robots equipped with explosive charges to contact, incapacitate, or disorient violent, armed, or a dangerous suspect. Okay, so obviously the police don't really have the best track record in terms of determining who is a dangerous suspect, who just happens to be like a black person walking down the street, right? Obviously don't have the best track record when it comes to making those determinations. And honestly, if you look at the way that police are trained, if you look at the way that they respond hysterically to some of these situations that they get themselves involved in, they are always escalating the situation, right? They are always the ones who, needlessly increase the violence of any given situation. And they're essentially taught that if there is even marginally any threat or potential threat to your life or your safety, that you can then go and use lethal force. Okay, so forgive me if I have some questions about their ability to actually carry this out in a fair or legitimate way, right? So that's number one. But in addition to that, okay, we're talking about a situation where these police officers who have already been ridiculously militarized across the United States, and just to give you a little bit of a perspective in terms of how militarized they have actually gotten. So here from the ACLU, this is part of this program called the 1033 Weapons and Equipment Transfer Program, which is essentially just a funnel from the U.S. military to a lot of these state police forces, right? So here from the ACLU, a little bit of background context in terms of how militarized our police have already been. They say the federal government arms local police forces in the United States with weapons of war. A program called 1033 for the section of the act that created it allows the Department of Defense to give state, local, and federal law enforcement agencies military hardware. They say since its inception in 1996, nearly 10,000 jurisdictions have received more than $7 billion of equipment. This includes combat vehicles. What the fuck would you need a combat vehicle for? Okay, the same police officers who could be completely kitted out, as we saw in Uvalde, SWAT vehicles and assault rifles and shields and all of this different gear that they have, still not even willing to go and actually put their lives on the line when it comes to somebody who is in actual active danger to not only their safety, but also the safety of innocent children, who, when we all saw how that played out in Uvalde, and none of them were willing to actually go in to confront him after, hours of, waiting for all of these children to die inside. But apparently they need more combat combat vehicles, and they also need rifles, military helmets, and misleadingly named non or less lethal weapons, some of which have been featured in police raids and police violence against protesters, including recent protests for racial justice. Okay, so that's just a little bit of background context on that. In addition to that, we also have studies that have come out showing that increasing this militarization of the U.S. police does absolutely nothing to increase, number one, public safety, but it doesn't even increase the safety of the officers themselves. Okay, so what the fuck is the point of this, right? Not increasing public safety, not increasing safety for the officers. What is the point of this other than to just, choose the most dystopian possible option that you could go with and give them additional, not only just that military hardware, but now apparently going to be introducing these robots that can remotely do the violence that our police forces do on a regular basis? I mean, it's just such a completely ridiculous situation, right? They continue here, saying that supervisors amended the proposal Tuesday to specify that officers could use robots only after using alternative force or de-escalation tactics. Okay, so you're more likely to just get shot by a regular gun that a police officer has on him before they bring out the robots, so I guess that's good news in some way, right? And they say, or de-escalation tactics, right? Something that police officers are famously amazing at deploying, right? Again, they are essentially taught when they go through these police trainings and go through the schooling, they're essentially taught that if there is a threat to your life, you use lethal force. You don't hesitate, you don't wait, you don't actually try to use de-escalation. Their version of de-escalation is just ending the situation as quickly as possible in order to protect themselves over the general safety of the public or the individual with which they are interacting with at any given moment. But just to give you an anecdote here that I've covered on this channel before, to give you a perspective in terms of how actual cops who are doing the right thing in some circumstances or trying to de-escalate a situation and not immediately resort to the most violent option possible. There was a story that dropped just back in 2017, which I think is a perfect encapsulation of how the U.S. police forces basically function as a gang or a mafia. And if somebody steps out of line, if somebody is not towing the line for the excessive violence of other police officers, then you are going to be either marginalized, pushed to the side, or in some cases just straight up fired, as was the case with this story. So they say here from CNN, lawsuit, cop fired for not shooting suicidal suspect. Fired for not shooting a suicidal suspect. Okay, so what are they talking about here? They say, they got a quote saying, he didn't appear angry or aggressive, he seemed depressed. So they have this cop here whose last name is Mater, 26 years old. He spoke to CNN. It's in September of 2016, 3 months after he was fired. He said, quote, the call came in around 2:50 in the morning, said Mater. The whole thing was over by 3:02 a.m. Ronald D. R.J. Williams Jr. was killed by police on May 6, 2016. They say, according to Mater, in the early morning hours of that day, police dispatch alerted a call from a woman who was frantic and requesting immediate help. He was less than a mile and a half from the caller's address, Mater said, and the first to arrive on the scene where Williams, 23, was standing outside his house with his hands behind his back. According to the former officer's lawsuit, he's obviously suing this department. I think he was successful in suing them for a wrongful termination. But he says Williams' girlfriend had called 911 because he was threatening to hurt himself with a knife, not the police officers, himself. They say Mater ordered Williams to show him his hands, and when he did, Mater said that he saw Williams was holding a silver handgun. Mater, who drew his own gun, told Williams to drop his and said the visibly choked up man told him, quote, I can't do that, just shoot me, clearly trying to commit suicide by cop. Over and over again, Mater said Williams pleaded for Mater to shoot him. Mater said that he was certain Williams was trying to commit suicide by cop. He says he didn't appear angry or aggressive. He seemed depressed, and as a Marine veteran that served in Afghanistan and as an active member of the National Guard, all my training told me that he was not a threat to me or to others. And he says because of that, I attempted to de-escalate the situation. I was just doing my job. So okay, an instance where this cop is actually doing the right thing here, right? They say according to the lawsuit, as Mater was trying to get Williams to drop his gun, 2 other officers from this department arrived on the scene. When Williams raised his gun, one of them immediately shot Williams in the head, killing him. And Williams' girlfriend had told 911 to tell responders that he had a gun, but that it was not loaded. Okay, so they knew it was not a loaded gun. They knew that it was not an actual threat. The first officer who responded on the scene determined he wasn't a threat to the officers, to other people around him, and was clearly trying to commit suicide by cop. These other cops just show up and immediately shoot him in the head. They say after Williams was killed, investigators also found that the gun was not loaded, and it was unclear from the lawsuit whether 911 dispatchers relayed the girlfriend's message to the first responders, and the police department has not responded to their calls for comment. So this type of a situation, right, where the police are actually engaging in legitimate de-escalation tactics, and the only person who gets punished for this situation, where this guy was needlessly shot in the head as he was actively trying to commit suicide by cop and was openly saying that, and the only cop that gets held accountable is the one who tried to do de-escalation. So again, forgive me for having some hesitation in believing that they are actually going to try to use these de-escalation tactics before deploying these new tools that they are getting in their toolbox here. They say, or they also have to, before or, after using alternative force or de-escalation tactics, or concluding that they would not be able to subdue the suspect through those alternative means, whatever the fuck that means, again, up to the discretion of the police officers. They say only a limited number of high-ranking officers could authorize the use of robots as a deadly force option. So hold on a second. You just said up there in the paragraph above that they were not planning to arm these with deadly force, right? They were just using this to disorient the suspect, right? But then they say only a limited number of high-ranking officers could authorize the use of the robots as a deadly force option. So you're just contradicting yourself. You are saying that, yeah, it's potentially, this is going to be something that could be used where a robot is going to be deployed to, kill somebody in one of these situations. They say, but explicit authorization was required after so they're basically making the argument here that, they had no choice but to pass this because of a previous California law. They say the explicit authorization was required after a new California law went into effect this year, requiring police and sheriff's departments to inventory military-grade equipment and seek approval for their use. And of course, as we just touched on there, the 1033 program, they say a federal program has long dispensed grenade launchers, camouflage uniforms. I mean, it's literally just like what we send our troops to go fight with overseas, right? So this is the war on terror now coming home to the United States for the American people. Grenade launchers. When in the goddamn fuck is a cop going to need to use a grenade launcher? I mean, really? Camouflage uniforms, bayonets, armored vehicles, and other surplus military equipment to help local law enforcement, as if they're like getting into, RPG battles with people on the streets of America. I mean, what the fuck are we even talking about here? They say debate on this measure on Tuesday ran for more than 2 hours with members on both sides accusing the others of reckless fear-mongering. They say Supervisor Raphael Mandelman, who voted in favor of the policy authorization, said that he was troubled by rhetoric painting the police department as untrustworthy and dangerous. Man, I wonder why people would get that sentiment from the police officers, right? I mean, it's not as if we're sitting in a current situation here in 2022, where, as pointed out here by Samuel, police have killed a historic number of Americans this year. Okay, 1,054 through just November 27th of 2022. Okay, higher rate than any year on record in the United States. And this is coming obviously years after we had one of the largest civil rights protests in American history with the BLM movement and the protests that coincided with that, protesting against police brutality. If anything, they've just doubled down on it. If anything, it is increased as their absurdly high budgets have also increased, and the amount of cops that people are hiring have also increased under the guidance of President Joe Biden there. So right, again, wonder why people have this idea that the police are untrustworthy and dangerous. It's because they fucking are, especially if you're talking about California. I mean, again, I urge you guys to go Google the LASD gangs, the sheriff's department within Los Angeles. They have essentially been operating as functional gangs throughout the city of LA, right? I mean, literally doing gang initiation shootings and killing and brutalizing citizens within LA. I mean, they literally operate as a mafia. They operate as a gang. Okay, so I mean, it's just completely ridiculous that you would have some sort of a troubled notion that people have this thought about the police officers, especially in a state like California. But he has a quote here saying, "I think there's a larger question raised when progressives and progressive policies start looking to the public like they are anti-police." It's not anti-police. First of all, I would consider myself, I probably am anti-police, right? I think police are pretty much just the jackbooted thugs that act on behalf of, private capital and things like that, right? They are the violent arm of the state. People should be more anti-police than we are here in the United States. But it's not anti-police to say that cops shouldn't get robots that can kill people. Really? I mean, that's anti-police? I mean, I would get it if people were coming out and saying like, oh, cops are pigs, or we should abolish the police or something. Yeah, that's anti-cop, right? But is it really anti-police to say, whoa, maybe we should slow down this whole lethal robot situation with the police? That's really anti-police. I mean, what are we talking about here? They say, I think it's bad for progressives. I think it's bad for this board of supervisors. I think it's bad for Democrats nationally. That's not even true, okay? First off, if you look at the results of the 2022 midterm elections, all of the motherfuckers in the Democratic Party who were running extremely to the right and focusing their campaigns on being aggressively pro-police, they disproportionately did worse in these elections. We had, multiple different progressives around the country that even in some swing counties did phenomenally well, as their opposition on the Republican side and in many cases on the Democratic side within the primaries were demonizing them for being aggressively anti-police and shit. Progressives on this issue overperformed, okay? So maybe you should start to have a little bit of self-reflection in terms of what the actual results are showing. Now, granted, I mean, the slogan, defund the police, is broadly not that popular. I think that that's because, there has been a widespread campaign of propaganda to try to, make people not understand what defunding the police actually means. People have this idea, especially as it's been pushed through the media, that like defunding the police just means like tomorrow you evaporate every single police officer in the country and just let like lawlessness reign. That's not what it means. It just means look at the budgets that these police officers have. A lot of these, especially like the NYPD, the LAPD, a lot of these places within the United States have higher police budgets than other countries' military budgets. Okay, so it's basically just looking at that situation, a situation again like Uvalde, where 40% of this county's entire city budget was going towards the police. And then what did they have to show for it? Absolutely nothing. So it's looking at a situation where they have absurdly bloated police budgets and then saying maybe we could actually reallocate those resources or defund their departments to some extent gradually over time and reallocate those resources into things that actually lower crime. Because believe it or not, adding more police officers, giving them more military equipment, giving them killer robots or whatever the fuck isn't going to lower crime in the long run. Okay, it's not. We already have a situation here in the United States where we have 25% of the global prison population. We only have 5% of the global actual population in total. And, we have not seen a significant decrease in crime, right? Because that's not how you address it. The way that you actually address crime in the long run is just by making investments into people, right? Making investments on the bottom rung of our economic ladder, okay? That's how you do it. You lift people up. You don't put them down and throw them into prison and get them into this endless cycle where they are never going to actually be able to create a sustainable life for themselves and their families, okay? You improve people's material conditions and crime will go down in the long run, right? But we can't improve people's material conditions if we're spending all of our fucking money on the police, okay? I mean, it's not that complicated of a conversation to have, but you still have Republicans, you still have Democrats out here just demonizing the notion that we should provide even just minimal checks on the police or make these other investments that are much more effective in the long run in terms of actually addressing crime, right? And I mean, just as a perspective here in terms of how this recent hysterical crime wave narrative has collapsed in real time. So over on Fox News, right, going into the election, hyping up this massive crime wave that's taking over the United States, anarchy is reigning, people are just running around and massacring people in the streets, right? Crime coverage on Fox News halved once U.S. midterms were over. They cut it in half, okay? Again, this is just fear-mongering. It's scaremongering. And, my point at the end of the day isn't that, like, crime doesn't exist in the United States. Obviously it does. But crime is much more correlated to people's material conditions. It's more correlated to poverty and, instability within people's lives and a lack of things like mental health treatment and actual public services than it's correlated to the amount of cops we have on the street or the amount of killer robots that they have, okay? That's the actual crime correlation. That's what you would actually do if you wanted to address crime in a meaningful way over the long run. So, I mean, again, at the end of the day, this is just another example of how absurd our police state is getting here in the United States. I mean, you just look at the objective statistics, whether it comes to their budgets, whether it comes to the amount of police we have, whether it comes to the amount of people we have in prison, sitting behind bars, in some cases even having to do like slave labor across the United States on behalf of private corporations. You look at the situation with new stories like this coming out about the implementation of, killer robots that are being introduced to U.S. police departments, which I didn't actually cover that in this video, but is very similar to something that the Israeli security forces do in their ongoing violent apartheid against the Palestinian people. Seems like we may have gotten that idea from them. But, I mean, at the end of the day, you look at just the culmination of this broad picture of policing and crime in the United States, and it's just like nobody on the Republican side and barely anybody on the Democratic side is actually looking at this in any legitimate way whatsoever in the long run in terms of actually addressing this problem.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying